So, let's talk about crushes. Childhood crushes. You know, that brief, unguarded age of innocence where all it took was a sideways glance, a quick smile, or that tiny touch that causes your entire nervous system to short circuit. And those crushes came from everywhere: the girl across the street, a classmate, family friend, or a cousin. Yeah, no, let's stop there. That being said, as for me, most of my crushes lived in the animated realm: flat colors, bold outlines, and zero chance of rejection. And one of them absolutely stood above the rest. I mean, how many people can honestly say their first crush had looks that kill and was armed with an XK1 power crossbow? Okay, pop quiz, hotshot. What do you get when you mash together a highly trained military soldier, martial arts skills edging much closer to ninja territory, some, let's say, bold outfit choices, and a codename inspired by a head of unapologetically fiery red hair? Well, frankly, my dears, the answer is someone you should absolutely give a damn about: GI Joe's counterintelligence specialist, Scarlet. Introduced as part of the very first wave of real American heroes back in 1982, Scarlet entered the scene as the lone woman in a sea of green dudes, which honestly was pretty much par for the course. This was the 80s after all, back when boys played with boy toys, starring mostly boy characters, and female representation in any boy toy line usually meant one token character, just enough to round out the team, check a box, and move on. That said, right out of the gate, Scarlet was not your standard obligatory estrogen quota filler. Sure, there was the, let's call it, questionable outfit, one that very clearly emphasized certain physical details so there'd be zero confusion about her gender, and looked way more superhero than real-world soldier. But the real difference was her specialty. In a lineup where most of the guys were basically defined by whatever weapons they were hauling around, machine gunner, laser trooper, bazooka Joe, Scarlet thankfully wasn't saddled with something like crossbow girl. Instead, she was labeled counterintelligence, a term that completely flew over my 6-year-old head, but instinctively I knew sounded way more important. And maybe, just maybe, explained why she always looked like she was 5 minutes away from going for a swim. And then there was her file card, which absolutely did not paint the picture of a damsel in distress tied along the train tracks. Quite the opposite. Graduated advanced infantry training and ranger school, special ed, covert ops school, marine sniper school, special air service school, marine taekwondo symposium, qualified expert M14, M16, M1911A1, M79, M3A1, M700 Remington sniper rifle, MAC-10, XK1 power crossbow, throwing stars, garrote, and K-bar. Now, sure, a cynic might look at Scarlet and dismiss her as unrealistic, a Mary Sue, or proto-boss girl, if you will. But I'd never really bought into that take. Scarlet always felt surprisingly real to me. Because let's be honest and deal in facts for a second. Throughout history, combat and warfare, and by extension the modern military, have been overwhelmingly male-dominated spaces. And yeah, that tracks, as the generally more physically strong, more aggressive, testosterone-fueled sex, it makes a certain kind of sense. Which also means that women operating in those spaces don't just have to keep up physically, they have to excel in other areas where men tend to, let's say, flounder: intelligence, adaptability, precision, and strategy. And I'm pretty sure that Larry Hama understood that perfectly when he first sketched out Scarlett's origin. She wasn't written to just outmuscle the guys. She was written to outthink them. Counterintelligence is all about keeping the enemy in the dark, feeding them bad information, and shaping what they think is happening rather than what actually is. But yeah, that doesn't mean Scarlet couldn't match up physically with any of her fellow Joe dudes, because she absolutely could. And honestly, that's what made her dangerous. confident and resilient, deadly, but thankfully still retained a sense of humor. So, Scarlett, real name Shayna M. O'Hara, was born in Atlanta, Georgia, a detail that, along with her name, deliberately echoes the protagonist and setting of Gone with the Wind. From a young age, Shayna was completely immersed in martial arts. Her father was a martial arts instructor and trained alongside her three older brothers, Brian, Frank, and Sam, starting at just 9 years old. She also had a sister, Shoban, who isn't especially important at this stage, but we'll get to a little later on. By her early teens, Shayna had already earned her black belt and was competing in tournaments regularly and winning. That success fed a growing sense of superiority. She believed she had already mastered everything worth learning, and her confidence slowly turned into arrogance. Her father, who believed martial arts were about balance and harmony rather than control, warned her repeatedly that pride would eventually bring her down. Shayna dismissed him, certain she knew better. The relationship began to fracture. That certainty collapsed after her father was seriously injured in an accident. Once the strongest man she knew, he was left permanently disabled and confined to a wheelchair. Shayna refused to accept it. She believed discipline, effort, and sheer willpower could fix anything. And when they couldn't, she grew bitter. Her father tried to explain the lesson he had been teaching her all along, that not everything in life can be controlled, and strength isn't just about pushing harder. Shayna couldn't hear it, still trying to impose order on a world that wouldn't cooperate. She pulled away. And so, following her mother's wishes, Shayna went to law school, and despite approaching it the same way she had martial arts, with focus, intensity, and zero compromise, leading to her graduating with top honors and becoming a lawyer, Shayna was still left unfulfilled. In fact, all the gray areas, loopholes, and constant compromise in her law practice made her feel powerless rather than purposeful. That led to the third chapter in her life, the U.S. Army, and it's here that everything finally clicked. Orders were clear, structure was absolute, effort was rewarded. Shayna thrived, even in a male-dominated environment where she had to prove herself repeatedly. Her record showed elite skills, exceptional instincts, multiple black belts, and an ability to lead under pressure. Eventually, her performance caught the attention of high-ranking officials at the Pentagon. And traditions be damned, they ran her through everything, which explains her rather stacked file card: advanced infantry training, ranger and military schools, covert operations, the full spectrum. They weren't just training a soldier, they were shaping the ideal candidate for a new, highly trained special mission force taking shape behind closed doors. And it's here, after joining GI Joe, that Scarlett finally meets the man who would become her soulmate, the love of her life, Duke. Just kidding! It's Snake Eyes. During one of the team's early training exercises where Scarlett was effortlessly opening up a can of whoop ass on her fellow Joes, Snake Eyes immediately gets her attention when she realizes that he was a way better fighter than her but was deliberately holding back. He allowed her to win, preserving her authority and credibility in front of the rest of the team. That quiet, respectful gesture created an immediate connection, and it marked the beginning of one of the most important relationships in GI Joe history. That bond was cemented during an early mission in the Middle East. When a helicopter malfunctioned mid-flight, Snake Eyes stayed behind to save a trapped Scarlet. During the crash, an exploding window severely injured him, permanently scarring his face and damaging his vocal cords. Both survived, but the incident became a major emotional turning point for the two of them and permanently tied their stories together. The ongoing story of Scarlet and Snake Eyes, alongside a small circle of Larry Hama's favorites like Stalker and Storm Shadow, became one of the creative anchors of the original Marvel GI Joe run. This was especially important at a time when the series was often treated by Hasbro and Marvel as little more than a printed toy commercial. Despite the constant introduction of new Joes and Cobras, sometimes dozens over the course of a year, Hama repeatedly refocused the narrative on Scarlet and that core group, and as a result, she remained a consistent presence long after many of the original team members quietly faded into the background. Anyway, Scarlett's devotion to Snake Eyes eventually led her into one of the most brutal moments in her entire story. While protecting him during his recovery after facial reconstruction, Scarlet is shot point blank in the head by the Baroness. And honestly, when I first read it, I thought Larry Hama had actually done the unthinkable and killed Scarlet off for good. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. And I also learned a brand new phrase in the process: oblique angle. As in Doc's own words, the bullet hit the dome of Scarlet's skull at an oblique angle and was deflected. So yes, she survived, though not without consequences. Scarlet was left comatose, declared brain dead, and placed on life support. And so, remember her sister Shoban? Yeah, this is where she comes back into the story. As Scarlet's legal next of kin, Shoban sought a court order to terminate life support, just so she could get her hands on their house back in Georgia. Bitch. But thankfully, against all odds, Scarlet wakes up, recovers, and is reunited with Snake Eyes. She also came back with a brand new look, leaning hard into that very superhero-adjacent aesthetic. I mean, at this point, you just kinda have to accept that Scarlet is a fan of the leotard look. With her recovery complete, Scarlet fully embraces her martial arts roots and joins Snake Eyes as part of the newly formed Ninja Force, where she immediately betrays the team, joins Cobra, and gets run through with a sword by Snake Eyes. Just kidding. It was all a ruse. Of course, Scarlet remained loyal, stated Joe through the end of the original GI Joe Real American Hero run, and has continued to be portrayed as a core, unwavering member of the team across later comics, cartoons, and continuities. And speaking of the cartoon, this is where Scarlet's real story happens, at least for me, because it was in the very first animated miniseries, The Mass Device, that Scarlet debuted and absolutely stole my heart. No, seriously. Growing up, Scarlet was part of my personal holy trinity of ultimate cartoon crushes, right alongside Tila and Chitara. What is it with me and redheads and furries? Let's not unpack that, shall we? But speaking of not unpacking things, here's one factoid worth unpacking real quick. Did you know that only a tiny percentage of a channel's subscribers actually get notified when a new episode goes up? Algorithms do their thing, notifications get missed, and a lot of you never get to see new videos hit. And that's why I'm setting up the official Stories from the Toy Shelf mailing list. Just a simple, direct way for us to stay connected. It makes sure you actually know when a new episode drops and lets you keep up with important channel updates too. And don't worry, no spam, ever. Your email stays private and you can unsubscribe anytime. And it's completely free. So if you want to help me keep this little community connected, just click on the mailing list link on my main channel page or at the top of this video's description below. And let's stay in touch. So, jokes aside, standing right beside her man of action, Duke, Scarlet plays a major role throughout The Mass Device, leading an Arctic mission with Snow Job to retrieve some radioactive crystals, and where she totally ditches Snake Eyes. Just kidding, he was caught in a trap and they did have a touching goodbye. And even when she's captured herself by Destro, Scarlet proves she's anything but helpless, nearly causing her transport to Cobra's hidden mountain fortress to crash. And once inside, she immediately leads a full-blown prisoner revolt alongside fellow captive slave Selena, who very clearly has the hots for Scarlet's man of action. To her credit, Scarlet calmly leads Selena away from Duke, although the fact that we never see Selena again, like ever, does make you wonder if Scarlet made absolutely sure she understood who Duke really belonged to. And if you want definitive proof of where Scarlet's heart lies, look no further than 1987's GI Joe the movie. That image of Scarlet holding a critically injured Duke in her lap as he slips into a coma? Yeah, that's the moment. Sorry, Snake Eyes fans, but in this continuity, Team Scar Duke rules, and Snake Eyes is still cool, but in this case, he drools and gets bitch slapped by a Cobra La Royal Guard. Need more evidence? Fine. In the later Deke series, Scarlet and Duke take a trip to England, for shopping and sightseeing, because nothing says romance more like taking in the sights and quality retail time. Could have been worse, I guess. At least she didn't have to deal with the Queen's corgi the way Cobra Commander did. Another version of Scarlet worth mentioning shows up in the animated series GI Joe Renegades, where she's reimagined as a much younger character and once again part of the core Joe team. This time around, the team, led by an equally young Duke, is on the run, framed for crimes they didn't commit. Sounds familiar. Anyway, during one of their adventures, the team gets a brief break from life as fugitives by hiding out at Duke's childhood home. That's where we meet his parents, who are voiced by Michael Bell and B.J. Ward, the original voices of Duke and Scarlet from the classic Sunbow series. On the surface, it's a fun little Easter egg for longtime fans, a nice nod to the franchise's animated roots. But honestly, I prefer to see it as something more. A quiet bit of meta storytelling that says, even across reboots, redesigns, and alternate continuities, Duke and Scarlet are made for each other. Anyway, let's jump ahead to the darker, more grounded micro-series GI Joe Resolute, where a tense and genuinely bizarre love triangle is subtly hinted at between Scarlet, Duke, and Snake Eyes. But by the end of the series, Scarlet makes her choice, clearly, confidently, and without hesitation. When Duke is injured and trapped inside a Cobra base set to self-destruct, Scarlet disobeys a direct order to evacuate without him. She stays with him inside the exploding base. That, thanks to some quick thinking from the Joe Ripcord, they both managed to survive, with the love triangle completely resolved with no doubt. Now that is love. True love. That said, since we've already mentioned his name, did you know that in another continuity, Scarlet's heart doesn't belong to Snake Eyes or Duke, but to Ripcord? So 2007's live-action movie, The Rise of Cobra, is definitely a movie with a whole lot of flaws and questionable creative choices, least of which was rounding off a solid core cast of iconic Joes, Scarlet, Duke, Snake Eyes, with a third-stringer Joe at best, Wallace Weems, codenamed Ripcord, a traditionally white as white can be redhead, played inexplicably by comedian Marlon Wayans. And not only did they give this dude the spotlight, they gave him the girl, as Scarlet, played by actress Rachel Nichols, ends up romantically paired with Ripcord, who openly flirts with her throughout the film. And while initially the all-business Scarlet rebuffs his advances, over time her stance softens, and by the end of the movie, she gives him a full-on good luck kiss on the lips before the final mission, which pretty much seals the deal. In this continuity, it's all about Scarcord. Anybody on that team? Anyway, all apologies are in order, as what started as a story about Scarlet definitely veered hard into which Joe has her heart. And while trolling Snake Eyes fans will never not be fun, that wasn't the mission. So, back to Scarlet, because regardless of which Scarlet ship you personally subscribe to, and there are many, one thing remains completely consistent and honestly kind of undeniable. Scarlet is, and always will be, the first official lady of GI Joe. Sorry CoverGirl, Lady J, and Jinx fans, but none of them can compete with the first. And when I say first, I mean that very literally. Scarlet wasn't just the first prominent female character in GI Joe lore, she was the first female action figure released in the line, debuting right out of the gate in 1982, alongside the original launch of A Real American Hero. That said, I think it's interesting to point out that Scarlet, along with a number of early concepts that shaped GI Joe, can actually be traced back to an earlier pitch by Larry Hama for something else. Before GI Joe was even on the table, Hama had developed an idea for a top-secret special operations force led by Nick Fury Jr., the son of Nick Fury that we all know as the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. A Fury Force, if you will. But when Marvel secured the G.I. Joe license from Hasbro, then Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter approached Hama about working on the new G.I. Joe comic, and the two agreed that many of the ideas from Fury Force could be reworked and adapted into G.I. Joe, including a character named Shadow, real name Lila Galil, the lone female member of the 7-person elite team, the group's intelligence specialist. Sound familiar? You guessed it, Shadow would eventually be turned into Scarlet. Originally conceived as a master of stealth weapons, that DNA is still visible right there in Scarlet's very first action figure. Beyond her trademark crossbow, her sculpt included a surprising number of concealed weapons. A mini pistol hidden in her inner right forearm, throwing stars molded onto her outer left forearm, and a tiny slingshot on her butt. And those details weren't just for show. In GI Joe: A Real American Hero #1, Scarlet actually uses her shuriken in combat, striking Cobra Commander in the wrist and allowing the Joes an opening to rescue his hostage, Dr. Adele Burkhart. Unfortunately, one crucial detail was missing from Scarlet's original action figure: her hair. I mean, she wasn't bald or anything, but in the name of preserving head articulation, her hair was trimmed way down, severely. The result was a pretty unfortunate, almost boyish look. I mean, to be fair, this was the early 80s when action figure sculpting was still kinda finding its footing. And in the case of GI Joe, articulation came first and aesthetics came later. Still, that original figure was a bit of a letdown, especially when you compare it to her absolutely stunning card art, which sold Scarlet as confident, capable, and undeniably cool. The figure itself? Kinda bland in comparison. It definitely tempered my excitement at the time. But what I really missed, and what would later become one of Scarlet's defining visual traits, was her ponytail. That long red ponytail would go on to be a huge part of her look in the comics, cartoons, and later figures. It gave her personality, movement, and presence in a way the early toy just couldn't manage yet. Anyway, despite being the aforementioned First Lady of GI Joe, Scarlet's original 1982 action figure would remain the only official Scarlet toy for nearly a decade. Aside from finding new life overseas in different colors, released as Glenda in Argentina and Quarrel in the UK, Scarlet didn't receive a brand new figure in the US line in over a decade. Not until 1993, just 1 year before A Real American Hero came to an end. And look, that 1993 figure is certainly a design choice. While you could kind of defend her OG figure's look as having some modern military vibe, this one was indefensible. Green leotard, bright yellow leggings, and shiny gold armor bits. And on top of that, she was saddled with a real ninja move action feature that sacrificed hip articulation and honestly, basic proportions for literal kicks. But I'll give it this. She finally had a ponytail, a real one. Well, rooted artificial hair. Obviously not actual human hair, that would be gross. And it's also worth noting that most of this figure was reused to create the street fighting kung fu fighter, better known as Chun-Li. And that was it. Pansit. No more Scarlet action figures. Okay, let me rephrase that. No more decent-looking Scarlet action figures for another decade and a half. It wasn't until 2007 that Scarlet finally made a proper comeback, returning as part of a special 25th anniversary box set celebrating the GI Joe line. And what was originally intended as a one-off nostalgia-driven release unexpectedly caught fire and ended up kick-starting a full-blown revival of the brand. And this new era brought modern articulation and improved sculpting. And thankfully, unlike the original run, more Scarlets. We got everything I'd argue we'd ever need. Classic Scarlet, Pilot Scarlet, which was a sly Easter egg homage to the Argentinian Joe Glenda, comic-colored Scarlet, live-action Scarlet in both covert ops and combat gear, Resolute Scarlet with an unusually large head, Renegades Scarlet, Scarlet with, let's say, a little too much eyeliner and makeup, Modern Ninja Scarlet, sadly now without rooted hair but thankfully without that tacky real ninja move gimmick either. And finally, a retro Walmart exclusive Scarlet, which honestly might be the best all-around representation of the character in this scale. But if your jam is for something bigger, then you would have to wait a few years later for the arrival of the GI Joe Classified series, Hasbro's 6-inch reboot that kicked things off with a very modern take on a wave of classic characters, including Scarlet. Like most of her wave mates, the first classified Scarlet was actually based on a video game released around the same time. And yeah, she's not exactly a fan favorite. That said, I kinda like her, especially that fresh, youthful head sculpt. It's a very different take, but it works for me. Thankfully, Hasbro knows its nostalgia-driven audience very well, and after a brief hiccup in the form of a live-action movie Scarlet, not based on Rachel Nichols from The Rise of Cobra, but on Samara Weaving from that later GI Joe movie whose existence we don't really need to acknowledge. Though to be fair, it is a cool-looking figure too. We didn't have to wait long though for a proper classic Scarlet, and oh boy did Hasbro go all in. This version came with everything, including not one, but two articulated ponytails. Two! And as an added bonus, that ponytail is completely removable, which conveniently satisfies the hardcore sticklers in the fandom who want their Scarlet looking exactly like that original slightly boyish O-ring figure. And speaking of hardcore sticklers, if you want your Scarlet to look like she stepped straight out of the cartoon, then Super 7 has you covered with their Ultimates version. Now, as an action figure, it's not exactly ultimate in terms of articulation, but honestly, that's beside the point. This was one of my most anticipated releases of 2024 because, as I said earlier, the animated Scarlet, is the version that stole my heart all those years ago. And this figure was the final piece that I needed to complete my ultimate trio of childhood cartoon crushes on the shelf. And for me, that's all that really matters. And speaking of what really matters, do you want to know what matters most to the Cobra Saboteur Firefly? Simple. Making the biggest bang possible with the most collateral damage. If you want to know more about Firefly, you can check out his story right here. And if you're curious about my latest video, I've got that right over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Who was your childhood cartoon crush? Go ahead and tell me your story.